Hi all, our notable game today takes a look at another recent game from the Qatar Masters. Magnus Carlsen was playing black against the very dangerous Super Grandmaster Mamedyarov, who's 2-7-4-8. So this is in round 8. Magnus Carlsen had drawn his previous 2 games, and a win here would be really keeping him in contention for trying to win the tournament. So in a way, it's good that Magnus was playing a very dangerous, aggressive opponent. Because a draw would make it very, very difficult if he wanted to win the tournament. So let's see what happened. The previous encounters, by the way, Magnus Carlsen, prior to the game, had beaten Mamedyarov 4-1 in classical chess with 6 draws. So a very nice record there. If you include rapid or exhibition games, Magnus has beaten Mamedyarov 14-3 with 10 draws. If it's only rapid or exhibition games, Magnus Carlsen's beaten Mamedyarov 10-2 with 4 draws. So overall, the context, it seems to be, in terms of a stylistic match, Magnus Carlsen is a bit of a tough style, it seems, for Mamedyarov to meet. We see d4, Magnus plays knight f6, c4, e6. So is it going to be a nimzo? We see knight f3, d5. So at the moment it's kind of Queen's Gambit decline territory, but now we go into the Rogozin system. So we have this pin, early pin. This has got very popular in recent years at the Super Grandmaster level, the Rogozin system. So we see bishop g5, and black usually kicks the bishop immediately here. Black doesn't usually castle. h6 is the most popular move here. White relinquishes the bishop here. Queen takes f6, e3, and now black castled. After rook c1, so delaying the movement of the bishop for a moment. And you might think this is a bit odd not to get castled. Let's see, this position here, rook c1 is the most popular move. There's over 300 games there. On bishop d3, black uses the tempo gainer, taking there. And so white's waiting a little bit longer with rook c1. So rook c1, d takes c4 though. So white in one move is taking on c4. You might think, does black have any other useful move? It's the most played move actually. Black doesn't seem to have many other useful moves in this particular position. So d takes c4, letting the bishop take in one go. c5. Now white castled. C takes d4. Now if white wasn't such an ambitious player, he might want a symmetrical pawn structure here to try and aim for a draw. Knight takes d4 is actually the most popular move, and with that you see that the pawn structure is symmetrical on both sides of the board, so the chances of a draw are maximised. There's no isolated queen's pawn or anything, no structural issue for white. E takes d4 though is also quite popular, getting an isolated queen's pawn, and with that these outpost squares could be useful for white, and there's some attacking possibilities if white really wants to play for a win, but this position is thought to be quite equal, for example like this. But the way Mamedyarov plays it, he plays another move which is also popular, not so much though, knight e4, kicking the queen, queen e7. And again, we can go for a symmetrical pawn structure, but Mamedyarov being Mamedyarov, he plays e takes d4, so it's an aggressive pawn structure here, knowing that the d4 pawn, the isolated queen's pawn, is a vulnerability. And there's an astonishing simplicity over the next few moves, which kind of remind me personally of de Groot's experiments that he found when experimenting against amateurs and masters and stronger players, that a tendency was the shift of attention to the central squares of the board. It seems that the masters weren't the calculating monsters that maybe was the assumption, that their advantage is calculation, but it's their focus, their discipline on the central squares. And here, this d4 pawn is pivotal now to black's play. Black essentially puts intense pressure now over the next few moves on that d pawn. We see rook d8 and queen e2. For the moment it provides hooks on c5 and e5 and attacking possibilities, and you also note without the knight on f6, this diagonal here might be useful for white in the future for some sort of battery. Knight c6, but already the pressure on d4, white defends. And now, again, relating to d4, bishop a5. The bishop is finding b6 now, which would be very useful, not just to hit d4, but even if that moves f2, there'll be a pin on f2 going to the king. We see knight g3, which introduces attacking possibilities like knight h5, queen e4, bishop d3, but it's losing a bit of attention on the center. If white wanted to play a more attentive move for the central squares, maybe bishop b5 here, because that contests indirectly d4 pressure. For example, like this. This has been seen before, and white can dissolve that d pawn, and this position should be okay. This has been played before, and there's been a couple of games here at least, and it's thought to be okay. White would remove his structural issue, and some of the central pressure will be dissolved. What happens here is, with knight g3, white has seemingly a bias towards attacking black's king, but doesn't dissolve the pressure. The pressure seems to be mounting now on d4 unchecked. So a bit more pressure on d4 now. Queen e4, as if there's some attacking possibilities, but for the moment there's always f5, for example, if needed. If there was a battery aiming at h7. So we see bishop d7, but even this move has d4 intentions. If black can put the bishop here out of the way, then the rooks can be potentially doubled like this. If d7, there's always knight e5, so you can imagine the rooks getting doubled on d4, and this is the plan. h4 now, very aggressive attacking move, bishop e8. We see a3. Now here, instead of a3 again, there might be a possibility for white rather, to dissolve that liability, the structural liability, with d5. Here, at move 18, a3 was played, but there was a possibility of dissolving the isolated queen's pawn with d5, for example, like this, where white would be fine. Black hasn't got any major advantage built up, but in the game we see a3 instead, and this allows Magnus to play rook d6, preparing to double rooks. And again here, d5 would try and dissolve the pressure before the pressure mounts. So d5 here, like this, for example, and it should be okay for white. But we see queen g4, and this does allow black to simply double rooks. The rooks are more aggressive in a way, focusing on that d4 central square and kind of pinning the d pawn to d1. d1 has only got one protector. We see here d5, but it's under much worse circumstances now than before with this pin. And in fact, black doesn't have to move the knight here. A pitfall for black, if he takes, then knight f5. And that would be forking queen and rook and hitting g7, threatening mate. So this would just be winning the exchange. But of course Magnus doesn't have to do that. He can use the pin now, which is with check. He plays actually a rather elegant looking move. Queen f8, just out of the way. So he can threaten e takes d5 and be protecting in advance the g7 against knight f5. On f6, maybe white can just play knight h5, for example. So f8 seems a great location for the queen under these circumstances. We see the move queen e4, and here Magnus doesn't have to take on d5. He actually puts more pressure on d5 first. He plays actually knight e7. So using that pin, trying to use and celebrate the pin basically. If he took on d5 here, then bishop b3 is a resource protecting d1. So the doubled rooks don't demonstrate their true power here. But by celebrating the pin now with knight e7, there's 4 attacking units now on d5 and 3 defending, but one of them is an expensive queen. So this isn't ideal for white. We see a one move threat, bishop d3 threatening mate. This is parried now with f5. And of course the d6 rook is ideally protecting e6 here. There's no check or anything. Queen e5, and Magnus just snaps up a centre pawn. Yes, Magnus has simply built up on that poor d pawn and won it. It doesn't seem very mysterious, Magnus's play. It rather seems rather logical and centrally focused play, building up pressure against white's d pawn and essentially just winning it at move 23. Maybe white is rattled. He does a piece sack. Bishop takes f5. Is there a point to this piece sack here? E takes. Knight takes f5, hitting the rook. Now if the rook goes back, this would be a mistake. If it goes back simply to d7, let's check this final position. We'll get into a near final position. But I'll just show you, if rook d7, rook takes d5, then knight e7 is good for white, forking the king and rook. But yeah, Magnus plays an elegant response here. There's 2 main ways of getting an advantage here. Magnus plays the stronger one, it seems, technically. Can you see what black plays in this position? So he doesn't have to play rook d7. Black to play, if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, what would you play here with black? It's really a very neat tactical refutation here of white's piece sacrifice. I give you 5 seconds starting from now. Black to play. Yeah, Magnus plays just rook c6. These rooks, yeah, are the only ones protecting each other. So if one leaves, then the other's unprotected at all times. And here, yeah, the problem is rook takes c6. We have bishop takes c6 defending d5. Yeah, white, actually, he resigned after rook c6. Let's look, just to make sure. What are white's resources here? Nothing much, basically. In fact, there's even just b takes c6, doesn't even have to use the bishop. As long as d5 is reinforced, either will do. Also, I mean, black's position here was good with bishop c6. You know, he can afford to lose the exchange there. Black's still better. For example, like this. So yeah, pretty disastrous. After rook c6. And if rook takes d5, it's with check, and even worse, the king and queen on a skewing diagonal is bishop c7 here. Yeah, it looks as though white self-destructed in this game. Black didn't seem to do anything that clever. It more felt like a great discipline about central squares. But the centre in chess, and we're taught this as a beginner quite often, the central 4 squares are the key 4 squares of chess. They're like the top of a battleground, they're the top of the hill looking in all directions, and d4 was a particularly vulnerable pawn. So it was kind of instructive how Magnus played against an attacking player with calm, methodical, centrally based play, picking on a clear exploitable pawn, potentially exploitable pawn, the isolated queen's pawn, just mounting pressure with the doubling of rooks and this bishop rerouting to b6. It seemed very elegant and natural, black's play. Black didn't seem to go out of his way to do something spectacular. But nevertheless, I believe these are the notable games which we can all learn from in the majority of our games. We don't have to play each game brilliantly, even if we want to win. Sometimes, if we're playing an attacking player, this kind of game shows we can play calmly and wait for them to come to us and self-destruct. So I hope you got something from this game. And Magnus, with this game, goes half a point ahead of the rest of the field. So a fantastic result for Magnus for the last round game, where he'll be playing Vladimir Kramnik. And in fact, I know the result of that game. It was a draw, so Magnus ended up winning the Qatar Masters 2015. A fantastic overall result in a very, very strong, fiercely contested open tournament, showing we really do have a very, very strong and resilient world chess champion. So congratulations to Magnus Carlsen. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.